What happens when a war that seems to be about strategy, airstrikes, and state power suddenly narrows to one man on a mountain? The answer is simple. For a while, the war changes shape. The maps stay the same. The aircraft are still in the air. The politics do not disappear. But the center of gravity shifts. Because once an American aircrew goes down inside hostile territory, the question is no longer only what the campaign is trying to achieve. The question becomes, who will reach that survivor first? That is what this story is really about. Not just a fighter jet lost over Iran, not just a rescue mission launched into the dark, but a race between three things at once. One man trying to stay alive, a state trying to find him, and a military machine trying to bend the battlefield long enough to bring him home. So how does a modern war suddenly become personal? It happens in seconds. One moment, the F-15E is still in the fight. The next, warning tones are cutting through the cockpit, systems are failing, and the crew has almost no time left to think. In fighter aviation, there are emergencies that unfold slowly enough for judgment. And then there are the other kind. The kind that collapse all choice into instinct. The aircraft did not gently lose altitude. It crossed a line. Something hit it, or something failed in a way that made continued flight impossible. Inside the cockpit, that distinction barely matters. Once the jet can no longer be saved, the sequence becomes brutally clear. Eject. Can a person feel relief in the same instant that his body is being violently thrown into the sky? Yes, but only for a moment. Because the ejection seat saves your life by punishing your body. It is survival delivered through force. A blast upward through the spine, a canopy gone, air rushing in. Then separation, descent, silence. And that silence can be deceptive. To an outsider, parachutes opening might look like the end of danger. In reality, it is the beginning of a different kind. The aircraft is gone. The speed is gone. The protection is gone. Now there is only ground, injury, distance, and whatever is waiting below. Why does the story become harder the moment the men survive? Because survival does not mean safety. It only means the next phase gets a chance to begin. The two airmen did not descend neatly into a friendly recovery zone. They came down over one of the hardest landscapes in the region, the Zagros Mountains. A place of steep ridges, broken rock, narrow valleys, and long lines of sight that can help or betray you, depending on where you stand. From above, those mountains can look beautiful. From the ground, they are exhausting. Loose shale underfoot, cold air after sunset, folds in the land that hide movement until it is suddenly too close. The healthy climber would have to work there. A wounded survivor would have to negotiate every step. Then came the first split in the story. One member of the crew was recovered sooner. That mattered for obvious reasons. It meant at least one life had been pulled back out of danger. But it also mattered for a more dangerous reason. Now everyone knew that someone else was still out there. Could that second man still disappear into the mountains before the search tightened around him? Possibly. But only if he moved fast enough to avoid the obvious routes, stayed disciplined enough to resist panic, and made choices that favored concealment over comfort. In other words, only if training took over before fear did. What does training actually look like when it stops being theory? It looks smaller than people expect, less cinematic, more physical. Before he could think about rescue, the survivor had to think about his body. Was he bleeding? Could he stand? Could he move without collapsing? Did the landing break anything that would make a climb impossible? After a high-speed ejection, pain is not always sharp. Often it is heavy, deep, compressive. The kind that makes a person feel shorter inside his own frame. The kind that punishes every breath and every twist of the torso. But in hostile territory, pain does not excuse delay. It only raises the price of every choice. What comes first in that moment? Not heroism. Not some grand attempt to outrun an army. The answer is simpler. Stop the immediate danger. Control bleeding if there is bleeding. Separate from the parachute. Move away from the landing site. The crash area is the first place anyone will search. That is where SIR stops being an acronym and becomes a rhythm. Survival, evasion, resistance, escape. Not as a slogan, as a sequence of habits. Do not stay where you came down. Do not travel where you would travel if you were merely lost. Do not choose comfort if comfort makes you visible. In those early minutes, the goal is not to win anything. It is to avoid losing too quickly. So where do you go when every obvious direction can get you caught? The instinctive answer is downhill. Water is lower, trees are lower, paths are lower. Human beings naturally think in terms of shelter and access. But behind enemy lines, access is often the problem. Roads, trails, dry riverbeds, and inhabited areas are not just useful, they are searchable. That is why the smarter move may feel backward. Instead of descending, you climb. Not because climbing is easy, because it is difficult. And difficulty can be a shield. Vehicles cannot reach high ridge lines. Patrols tire faster on steep slopes. Search patterns tend to favor the paths people are most likely to choose. A disciplined survivor tries to become unlikely. Was climbing upward a guarantee of survival? No. It was a trade. More strain on an injured body, more exposure to cold, less access to water and rest, but also more broken terrain, more shadow, more observation, and fewer easy approaches for anyone trying to close in. This is one of the quiet truths of combat survival. You do not choose the option that feels best in the next 10 minutes. You choose the option that improves your odds over the next 10 hours. And in the Zagros, high ground could buy exactly that. Time. How do you stay connected without giving yourself away? By treating communication like a ration, not a habit. A survival radio or locator beacon is not magic. It cannot rescue you by itself. But it can do something almost as important. It can turn you from a missing person into a trackable problem. That changes everything for the people trying to reach you. One short signal can tell rescuers that the survivor is alive. Another can update a position. Another can confirm movement, injury, or nearby danger. Those messages do not have to be long. In fact, long is often worse. Long means time on the air. Time on the air means a greater chance that someone else notices the pattern. So, should the survivor keep transmitting continuously to make rescue easier? No. That would be a mistake. The smarter rhythm is intermittent. Transmit. Stop. Move. Wait. Then transmit again only when the value is worth the risk. That kind of restraint is difficult when a man is alone. Silence can feel like abandonment. But disciplined silence is sometimes what keeps a rescue possible. The signal must be just enough to guide friendly forces and not so much that it narrows the search for the enemy. That balance is not dramatic. It is technical, patient, and unforgiving. And yet it may be one of the most important balances in the whole story. What kind of hiding place can protect a wounded man from both the ground and the sky? Not a place that looks dramatic. Usually the opposite. A narrow crease in stone, a rocky fold, a shallow depression that blends into everything around it. The best concealment in mountain terrain often looks like nothing at all. A good position has to solve several problems at once. It must limit visibility from below. It must reduce the chance of standing out against rock and shadow. It must allow some awareness of approaches. And if communication is still needed, it must leave enough of the sky open for a signal to get out cleanly. That matters because survival is not just about hiding. It is about hiding while remaining recoverable. A position that makes you impossible to see but impossible to reach or impossible to contact is only half useful. The right hiding place is not where you disappear forever. It is where you disappear long enough. From that point on, the battle becomes one of stillness. Wait, listen, judge sound, preserve energy. In those hours, a distant engine can mean a patrol. A flash of light in a valley can mean a vehicle. The absence of sound can be as informative as sound itself. Mountain warfare teaches patience, whether you want it or not. But was the survivor really only hiding from soldiers? No. That is what made the problem larger. Once the aircraft came down, the search did not remain confined to uniformed units. Reports of rewards, public alerts, local pressure, and widespread reporting changed the nature of the hunt. In practice, that meant the mountains were no longer just terrain. They became a social space. What does that mean for a man on the run? It means every village matters. Every road matters. Every shepherd trail matters. A civilian is not automatically a threat, but a civilian landscape is unpredictable in ways that military doctrine cannot fully control. Someone may report a sighting for money. Someone may do it out of loyalty. Someone may do it out of fear. The effect is the same. The search area grows eyes. And once that happens, the survivor is no longer just hiding from patrol routes and formal sweeps. He is hiding from the possibility of being noticed at all. That changes what movement means. It changes what daylight means. It changes the value of every exposed step. This is where the stakes of the story sharpen, not because it sounds dramatic to say an entire region was hunting one man, but because the logic is real. Incentives alter behavior. Public messaging alters attention. Once authorities turn geography into a reporting network, the cost of a single mistake rises quickly. This, what was happening far away while one man tried to vanish into the rocks. The American system was shifting from uncertainty to recovery. That transition matters. Before a survivor is confirmed, planners are dealing with possibilities. Once signals come in, once a track is established, once movement is understood with enough confidence, the mission becomes concrete. It acquires a center. At that point, intelligence, surveillance, aircraft routing, fuel planning, rescue crew readiness, and command decisions begin converging on a single objective. Not in the abstract, on a real set of ridgelines, in a real window of darkness, under real enemy pressure. The rescue is no longer theoretical. It is now a problem of timing and risk. Can a modern military really redirect major resources for one isolated crew member? Yes, because that is not a side mission. It is a core promise. Personnel recovery is built into the logic of modern air power. If people fly into danger, there must be a credible plan to retrieve them if they go down. Otherwise, the whole system changes in ways commanders do not want. That is why rescue missions can seem disproportionate from the outside. They are not only about saving a life, though that is already reason enough. They are also about morale, trust, discipline, and the integrity of a force that sends people into contested skies with the expectation that they will not simply be written off if the worst happens. But how do you rescue one man deep in hostile territory without making the whole sky point directly at him? You do not rely on a single movement. You create layers. Some layers watch. Some layers protect. Some layers distract. Some layers hold options open if the first plan fails. Rescue, especially in hostile airspace, is rarely a straight line. It is closer to choreography under pressure. Some of the accounts in the source scripts emphasize deception, multiple aircraft groups, misleading patterns, efforts to pull attention away from the true pickup zone. The exact details may be harder to verify than the underlying principle, but the principle itself makes sense. If the enemy can only focus on one place, that place becomes dangerous, fast. If the enemy must divide attention across several possibilities, rescue teams may gain the margin they need. This matters because the visible part of rescue is often the smallest part. People remember the helicopter. They remember the extraction. They remember the image of men leaving the ground. But what makes that moment possible is everything the viewer cannot easily see. The aircraft at altitude, the sensor feeds, the route planning, the timing adjustments, the decision to hold fire in one place and apply pressure in another. In that sense, rescue does not just reach into the battlefield. It reshapes the battlefield around the survivor. Not permanently, not absolutely. Just enough, just long enough. Why is time the real enemy in almost every story like this? Because time works for everyone differently? For the survivor, more time can mean a better position, a longer movement away from the crash site, a better chance to avoid immediate capture. But more time also means pain, fatigue, cold, thirst, and the slow wearing down of judgment. For the searchers, time means wider coverage, more reports, more organized patrols, and more opportunities to close the ring. For rescuers, time is both a resource and a threat. Every extra hour can make the plan more informed. More aircraft can be moved. Better routes can be studied. More support can be layered in. But every extra hour also increases the odds that the survivor will be located by someone else first. Can technology solve that problem by itself? No. Technology can narrow uncertainty. It can speed decisions. It can help shape the airspace. But it cannot remove the human part of the equation. A wounded man still has to make disciplined choices. A pilot still has to fly into risk. A commander still has to decide when the window is good enough. This is why these missions feel tense, even when the audience knows rescue is possible. The uncertainty is not theatrical. It is structural. Every moving piece has to arrive at the same answer before the window closes. Not the perfect answer, just one good enough to act on. So what does extraction actually demand at the final moment? Precision, nerve, and a certain acceptance that the last step may be the most vulnerable step of all. A helicopter on the move is hard to hit compared to a helicopter hovering or landing. A pickup zone in mountains is rarely ideal. Dust, slope, confined space, uncertain approaches, possible small arms fire, and rapidly changing visibility all make that final maneuver fragile. Does rescue become safer once the aircraft is overhead? Not necessarily. In many cases, that is when danger becomes most concentrated. The survivor must be found quickly. The landing zone must stay viable long enough. Protective fire, observation, and extraction timing must all hold together. A delay of seconds can feel much longer when everyone involved knows how exposed the moment is. That is also why the most dramatic stories from rescue missions are not always the most truthful. Real extraction is often controlled rather than cinematic. Fast movements, clipped communication, medical checks done under pressure. A rapid load, then departure. The intensity comes from what could happen if any one of those steps slips, not from someone trying to make the moment look heroic. And when it works, the outcome can look almost anticlimactic from a distance. Men board, aircraft lift. The ridge falls away beneath them. The sound recedes. But beneath that apparent simplicity sits a chain of calculations, signals, risks, and quiet discipline that may have been building for many hours. Why does a story like this linger longer than the technical details that built it? Because the technical details are only half the story. The other half is trust. The trust of a survivor who has to believe that staying disciplined is worth it. The trust of air crews who take off knowing that if they are lost, people will come for them. The trust inside a military institution that cannot ask for sacrifice without preserving that promise. This is where the story becomes larger than one downed F-15E. It becomes a test of whether a modern force can connect one isolated human being to a system vast enough to find him and disciplined enough to recover him. Not perfectly, not without risk, but credibly. Could the whole broader war really pause in spirit, if not in fact, for one man? In a sense, yes. Not because strategy stops mattering, but because strategy is made of human commitments as much as military objectives. Sometimes the clearest measure of a war machine is not what it can destroy. It is what it is willing to risk to retrieve. And that may be the most important point in this entire story. The rescue is not only evidence of capability, it is evidence of values turned into procedure. Aircraft, sensors, helicopters, planners, medics, escorts, and pilots are all part of that. But at the center of it remains something almost old-fashioned, a refusal to leave one man to the geography, the enemy, and the night. What then is the true shape of this story when all the noise is stripped away? It is the shape of a narrowing race. A jet falls. 2 men descend. 1 is recovered. 1 remains. A mountain becomes a hiding place. A province becomes a search network. A set of signals becomes a lifeline. A rescue plan forms in layers. Then everyone moves toward the same point from different directions. The survivor moves to remain unseen. The searchers move to make invisibility impossible, as the rescuers move to create a gap between those two realities. That is the whole drama. Not exaggerated, not mythical, just precise enough to be frightening. And in the end, what is carried out of those mountains is not only a wounded officer. It is proof that modern warfare still depends on something profoundly human. Training under stress, patience under pain, discipline under isolation, and a promise held together by people who may never meet the man they are risking themselves to save. That is why the story lasts. not because it is loud, but because it reveals the hidden structure beneath the noise of war. One man in the rocks, many eyes in the valleys, many aircraft in the dark, and between them, a shrinking margin in which survival, search, and rescue are all fighting the same clock. So how should this story be remembered? Not as a legend polished until every detail sounds too perfect, and not as a simple action sequence. It should be remembered as a disciplined chain of choices. A pilot and a weapons officer forced out of the sky. A survivor who understood that movement, silence, and restraint mattered as much as courage. Searchers trying to turn terrain into capture. Rescuers trying to turn timing into escape. It should also be remembered for what it says about scale. A cockpit can become a mountain story in seconds. A mountain story can become a national search. A national search can redirect military attention far beyond the ridgelines where it began. War often looks largest when seen from space or from maps, but sometimes its most revealing form is smaller. One injured man in a place he cannot remain. And that, in the end, is the answer to the first question. What happens when a war suddenly narrows to one man on a mountain? The answer is that the war reveals what it values. It reveals what one side hopes to capture. It reveals what the other side is willing to risk to prevent that. And it reveals whether training, discipline, and timing can hold long enough for a single human life to remain within reach. For a few hours, or perhaps a little longer, the geography of a larger conflict was reorganized around that test. A survivor held on. Searchers closed in. Rescuers built a corridor through uncertainty. And somewhere in the dark over the Zagros, the oldest promise in military aviation was being measured again. If one of ours goes down, we go back for him.